All right, so I want to welcome everyone that's joining us this evening for the beginning of our series in talking about minority mental health. Tonight, joining me are our guests. Well, here we go. Carrie Wilder. She is a bilingual therapist at Belief Survivors, formerly known as Sexual Assault Services. And then Angela Holland, who is a HALO case manager currently and also working as a family support coordinator at LaPrix. And they're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves as well. So I'll let you guys take it over from here.
All right, so I can go first. So as she said, my name is Carrie Wilder. I'm the bilingual therapist at Belief Survivors. I've been with Belief for a total of 5 years, actually, on this July. So it's 5 years now, which is weird. We provide services to sexual assault survivors and their support systems. It's completely free of charge. We've been doing so since I believe like 1999. So a little bit about myself, I guess. The reason why I got into this work is because I majored in criminology and psychology at Marquette in order to be a lawyer, because I wanted to be out there fighting crime, I guess. And then I ended up liking my psych classes more. So I majored in, I got my master's in community psychology. Community psychology just means that we look at people as part of a community and not as if they were raised in a bubble, which is why topics like these are so important to me, because I feel like, especially when it comes to mental health, we often look at people through a white lens. We diagnose through a white lens, we treat through a white lens, and we act like people haven't experienced trauma. We act like people haven't been disrespected by the systems that we are, whether we like it or not, a part of. So I think it's important to talk about all the stigmas and all the things that are associated with that. I don't know if you want to go in through the rest of the intros before I get into all that, or I should just keep on talking.
Sorry, I muted myself. Angela, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick and then we can jump into things?
Sure. My name is Angela Howland. I'm a case manager at HALO, the Homeless Shelter in Racine. Also, I'm a family support coordinator at LaPrix Enterprise in Racine as well. How long? I've been at HALO since 2007, so about 14 years. And I've been at LaPrix part-time for about 3 years right now. So basically, I got in the field because I enjoy helping people, but then more so, I just recently graduated with my master's in I just recently got my master's and pursuing my LPC IT to start counseling. And one of the big reasons or the goals that I wanted to, or the reason why I got into that field or want to go focus more on getting my LPC was to help people in my community, address some of their mental health concerns, or to at least have them understand that it's not.
Angela, I think you're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
So, okay. So just help people in my community just kind of like familiarize themselves with getting help for themselves, because a lot of people, label mental health as being crazy and don't want to seek help because they don't want that label, but just trying to get them more familiar or get them to kind of tune into it, and let them know that that's something that can be beneficial to them in the long run to kind of help some of the stressors and things that they are experiencing.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, we can start by talking about some of the stigmas that you guys see in the community that are challenges, especially for people of color when they're seeking treatment or looking to get help for something that they're dealing with or struggling with.
So I think one of the major things why people of color don't usually seek mental health services is, one, I think as a community, because of the systems and the history of systems failing people, I think admitting that you need help in certain areas kind of puts you under a microscope, or it feels that way, as if you're gonna be, you know, criticized in the way that you raise your children or anything like that because you are asking for help. You know, are they gonna take away my kids? Are they gonna, you know, do all these things because I'm looking for someone to help me with my depression or my anxiety? Also, I think the biggest thing is that they also, you're crazy, you know, you're put under this, like, it's instantly labeled, even if so many people are dealing with depression and anxiety. I feel like, you know, especially with the newer generation being so open and talking about like struggles that they have, a lot of people have depression and anxiety, but the moment that you're like, oh, well, I'm talking to someone to figure out how to deal with my depression, they're like, well, you're insane, you're crazy, you can't be trusted, you know, all these things, where it's just like, it's something that we all most people at some point struggle with, even if it's just a small portion of like mental health issues. There's going to be a situation in your life where you're going to be more anxious. You might need to get some medication, even if it is temporarily. People are going to experience PTSD, especially in low income communities. People are going to experience PTSD as women going through the world, especially when 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted, you know, and it's oftentimes by people in your household. So, you know, if you're sexually assaulted by your uncle and no one's ever talking about it, you're going to have PTSD symptoms, some depression, some anxiety that you then need to work through. But I think the biggest thing is people don't want that label of I'm crazy, you know, I need help, especially with the history of people of color where mental health wasn't necessarily something that was put in the forefront because we were focused on survival. You know, slavery didn't allow for time for depression or anxiety or even schizophrenia. You know, none of that was in your forefront when you're just trying to make it through the day. So I think, you know, when you look at that in comparison, where you're like, just a couple generations ago, we weren't allowed to do anything, you know, mental health, we don't have time for that. Who has time to be crazy? You know, who has time to, you know, lay in bed and be depressed when you're supposed to be pushing forward all the time? I think that pressure is put on people in all communities, but especially on people of color, that you need to be better than the last generation. You need to progress all the time. And if you have a mental health issue, that feels like a blocker to that. And that's just not acceptable. You need to pray the demons away. You know, it becomes part of that because you need to just keep pushing. So it becomes even like you can't talk to your family about it. So why would you talk to some person that you don't know about issues, especially when talking to outside agencies often got the family in trouble? You know, that's another thing that's like, why would you want to talk to somebody about our secrets, our stuff, when you know they're going to come knocking on our door and you cause issue for all of us now?
Right. That makes sense. And those are some really great points. Thank you.
I agree with Carrie too. Like I work with a lot of different people, a lot of different families, and the biggest one is, you know, distrust, just distrust within the system, because you know sometimes when you are in the system, you are forced to seek certain kind of treatment or help or things like that. But then it's all getting reported and it might be used against you. You know, so that's one thing that I've run into a lot. Another thing is systematic racism, like she kind of touched base on too, and lack of cultural sensitivity. That's a big one because they're like, how can you help me when you don't understand me, or how can you help me when you have this judging, you know, aspect towards me. So I totally agree with her as well. And then, like she said too, with praying, I know even within my own family, we use prayer a lot. Prayer is the go-to. You know, we're praying, you know, so we can release some of this stress or release some of this tension or depression or things like that. So I totally agree.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these are great points. I mean, a lot of us know, excuse me, a lot of us know that stigma is still like a huge blockade to why anybody doesn't reach out for help. Nobody wants that label. Nobody wants to carry that with them through their life. And, you know, hopefully through education and stuff, we can end that stigma. But I think we overlook some of the other challenges that people of color face within their own communities too sometimes, you know, like cultural blockades and things along those lines. So I appreciate those points of view coming from you guys. Do you think that not having enough providers that represent your communities plays a part in that as well.
100%. I think that it's already difficult for people of color to reach out for help because of all the things that we've already discussed. And now you're talking to someone who might not see the world the way that you see it. So they don't understand. And it gets in the way of treatment when you have to explain why you feel a certain way. When I can talk to somebody who looks like me and say, I don't trust the police, and I don't have to explain that.
Mhm.
I don't have to sit there and give 8 examples of why the police have mistreated me or my community, because the person that I'm talking to, usually based on their skin color, understands that. They understand why I might not feel comfortable going to a police officer, or why I might not feel comfortable going into certain spaces. So you end up spending 45 minutes of a 60-minute session explaining why you feel a certain way without actually addressing your emotions. So you end up having to teach your way through therapy, which doesn't help anybody, because I just want to say how I feel and why I feel that way, and let us work through that, not have to educate you on the history of why I feel that way and why it's appropriate for me to feel that way and why I shouldn't be shamed for feeling that way. You know, and now I've only gotten, you know, a quarter of the hour that I'm paying for, if I'm paying for services. But
Right.
that's the only time that I have to talk about me, instead of having to represent my community in a room of just me and my therapist. And it also stops me from sharing certain things, because I also feel like I'm a representative for my community. So if I share this, are you going to think all Black people are like this? Are you going to think all Puerto Ricans are like this? Are you going to think that, you know, I'm representing the whole Latin America? Like, you know, all those things that stop you from sharing things, versus if you see somebody and you get it. Like, I also like languages. If I have to say all this in my second language, that also stops me from seeking services or going or having an effective session. If I can just talk to the therapist in the language that I'm most comfortable in, whatever that language be, I'm able to express my emotions 100 times better, you know, versus having to sit there and translate it in my head. Now filter it through one lens and then filter it through another before I share it with you. So yeah.
Angela, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, it goes back to like she kind of summed it up, where that culture sensitivity, you have to continue to educate, which becomes time consuming, which becomes, I've heard people say, well, I was sitting there, she was asking me a ton of questions, you know, in therapy, and I didn't feel like I got anything out of it. And after a couple sessions of going through that, you don't want to continue to go through it. And it's like, okay, forget it. I'm going to take care of it this way. I'm going to handle it the way best I know how. And then you have other people I've seen that seek out African-American counselors, and they just cannot find any, or they're booked, or, you know, or something of that nature. So yeah, that's definitely another issue that has come up that I've heard about as well as a barrier.
Thank you. Those are really eye-opening too. You know, as somebody who lives with a mental illness myself, like I can't imagine going into therapy and then having to justify why I feel the way I feel. Like you're already there because you're struggling. And then to add that to the struggle, I can't fathom what that feels like and how much more difficult that has to make things. So I think it's great, again, that we're hearing this and talking about, you know, some of these things. So I'd also like to get your guys' perspective on what, you know, a lot of this starts locally. So like looking at our community, looking at Racine County, what are some of the things that you see that we could be doing better? What kinds of services would you like to see Racine County offering? What things do you think we are doing well, if there are things, you know, just how can we help this? How can we make this better?
For me, it's education. Not only educating communities about mental health, but educating communities about the cultures that they are surrounded by. Because I feel like no matter what we do, first of all, seeking mental health treatment is already hard enough as a person of color. Going into a field that focuses on mental health is also very hard. You know, I had to explain to my very Puerto Rican grandmother why I wanted to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to pursue my master's degree to service people with mental health issues when she didn't think mental health issues existed. She was like, depressed people are lazy. depressed. You know, I had to go through years of school, and she was, when I started off trying to be a lawyer, she was very excited about it. When I switched my major, she was less excited. So, you know, we're going to end up with a field that is, you know, predominantly white, at least for a couple more generations until we get to that point. So I think educating the community about various cultures is also part of it. You know, having critical race theory taught in schools, I think, is essential. I think telling people about their actual history allows them to see the world through a lens that allows space for other people. Because if you've only been taught history one way, you don't have space in your brain for other people. It doesn't make sense that other people fit in that puzzle as well. When you're taught with a wider lens, where it's not just white people made history, it's, you know, people of color also made history. We contributed to this country in a million different ways. You should know about all those ways, and you should also know about the ways that we had conflict and the honesty about that conflict, so that when you move through the world, you understand that other people have other experiences. So that when you're sitting in an office as a therapist, people don't have to explain everything to you. Maybe they have to explain some of it because you don't understand the experience, but they can explain, they can say things like, I've had a bad experience with the criminal justice system, and you get it. You understand that people are incarcerated at higher rates. You get those kinds of things, you know, without having to sit there and not have a whole history lesson with your therapist and be like, all right, in 1960s, you know, and go all the way to the beginning when you weren't even born in the 60s. So why do you have to talk about it? They should know about it. You know, so I think education around cultures is important, but I also think mental health education is super important, and teaching people that it's not a death sentence to have a diagnosis, you know. And I think for people in the communities of color, like, it kind of makes you feel weaker, like you're more vulnerable, and your family's not supporting you and the community's not supporting you. So having the knowledge, you know, someone coming into your classroom and saying that it's okay to struggle is a big deal. So I think education in multiple ways is important.
Piggybacking off Carrie, I think education within the school system starting, that's a big one, because when you start putting it in our kids' head, then they can try to kind of take it home to the family unit. So that's one big thing. So just so that they can understand. Another one is even not treating the behavior as a disciplinary situation, and more so getting the person help, the right help that they need, or not holding it against them. That will try to kind of trigger them to want to get the help and like, oh, okay, they're on my side type of mentality. And then resources available, the insurance, making sure that, and I know this is hard for like some businesses, but like sliding scales, or like what even Carrie, they offer, don't like sliding scales, or
we are free.
Okay, but even more free services, within the community or whatever. So because even having insurance, that's an issue, or trying to figure out how to obtain insurance, or if the insurance will cover, or how many sessions will the insurance cover, or can I afford a co-payment? So having more services available that's financially equipped for people who are going through certain things like that. But the biggest one is starting in the school systems. That's my biggest one, starting in the school system, and then everybody that's involved in your life, whether it's CPS, whether it's the criminal justice system, being on board with the help and things you need, and focusing on that help versus that criminal discipline.
Yeah, I definitely have a privilege that I forget about. I don't bill for my services, so I forget how expensive therapy is. And that's another big barrier for people, is that if I need to spend my money in a different way, then why would I spend it on something that my community doesn't even think is an issue? It's not something that exists. Why would I spend money, going to see a therapist and talking about problems when I'm going to also face backlash at home, But we don't charge for our services. So again, it's something that I don't think about. I think that people can get therapy occasionally if they need it, because that's what we offer. We have unlimited sessions if you are a survivor of sexual assault. Unfortunately, we have a waiting list for that reason, because it is a needed service. So we do have a waiting list. I think it's, we talk about it every meeting that our waiting list is pretty hefty, but it's just because we don't limit people on the services that they can have. Someone can be my client for years because we understand that that's what you need. It's sexual assault is a trauma that happens to a person, but impacts all parts of their life. And so we want to talk about things like, how is that going to impact you going to school and all that kind of stuff. So we will they will be in therapy for 4 or 5 years if they want to. So we end up having a wait list, but it is free. So, you know, I feel like anything free is going to have a wait list. You know, that's how that works.
So, and I agree with you, but I think it's important to point out too, though, is that you're servicing a very specific group of people. So, and you have a wait list. So imagine what that wait list is for the rest of the population that doesn't fit the scope that you guys are dealing with right now. So yeah, no, I think it's important that, you know, we point that out. Services, and that's for everybody, services are difficult to get into. And I think that's a barrier for a lot of people because it's really disheartening when you call to get the help that you want or that you need in that moment, and they're told it's going to be about 6 months before someone can talk to you.
Yeah. We do offer emergency sessions because we try to like,
yeah,
and if they need it, but the reality is that because of the way that our health system is built, people are going to struggle to get in for services. It sucks. And I think that would be the best option would be if we all had easier access to services and affordable services. I think that would be amazing. And I think more people would probably reach out for help if it was that easy, because you have to get up the courage to sign up, and you have to get up the courage to call, and you have to say, yes, I'm admitting that I have an issue, only for people to tell you it's going to be 6 to 8 months before you get to talk to somebody about this thing that you've been building up the courage to talk to someone about for about 3 years.
Right.
You know, and it's hard. And I think that, I mean, if I had a magic wand, that'd be the first thing that I would do is make sure everybody had the option, you know, but people don't even have that.
No, I think those are all really good points. So we will take questions. If you guys have any questions that are watching with us, you can either type them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question if you have anything. Is there anything we haven't covered, ladies, that we discussed?
Oh, I think one of the questions was also like, what have you personally seen or experienced?
Yes, thank you.
So I did want to talk a little bit about, you know, growing up in the communities that I grew up predominantly in the South Side of Milwaukee in the Latino community. And so growing up, I personally saw people struggle so hard with mental health issues, but not be able to get help because of money or because of the backlash that they would face afterwards. You know, I saw people like with 8 kids struggling with depression, the kids not being able to be clothed. But what happened was the community would rally around this person in a way. And I wanted to bring that up, that like, because we talked about all the barriers and all that stuff, but the communities do help people in their own ways. And I think that's important. That I think that communities of color oftentimes will rally around people just to avoid that stigma of mental health. And there is that positive that they will rally, they will help you feed your kids, they will help you clothe your kids, they will help you take your kids to school, they will do all those things just so you don't have to be labeled as a depressed mom, you know. And I think that was something that I just wanted to mention, that there is positives. It's not just all sadness of people struggling in their homes. Like communities, we're used to being a community. That's how we survived. We don't survive in isolation. You know, when you have been oppressed and you have been dealing with all these things, we couldn't have made it this far if we didn't decide that we were a team. And I think that's important to mention, that we people of color usually do unite and they form a team and they move forward that way. That's how we've kind of gotten here, but not that it's easy, but that's what's happened.
Right. No, I think that's really good to mention as well. We're definitely not trying to just focus on the negatives here, but I mean, we're trying to address, you know, what happens in that community and, you know, what we can do to help change those things, you know, as a society, as a community, you know, as members of Racine, you know. And I think that's something we should talk about too, is like, this does take a community. It takes every single one of us, regardless of color, to make these changes and make things better for all of us. Before I jump into the advocacy part of it, Angela, did you have any of like the personal
I just want to say,
experiences?
just working at the shelter, you know, another thing with personal stuff that I've witnessed a lot is a lot of people are using self-medicating, to deal with some of the traumas and stuff that they're experimenting with or experiencing. Sorry. So that's something that I kind of noticed a lot, even within the community, to be honest with you, but definitely working within the shelter. A lot of people are using that as a coping strategy. And I also teach substance abuse groups too. So even teaching the adults coping strategies, they're like, oh yeah, I maybe can do that. Or yeah, well, and then one lady told me today, well, I never experienced life without substances. So I don't think I'll have fun. I'm like, okay, well, what have you tried? And they don't even understand or know. So it's just kind of learning how to live life and treat what you're experiencing versus, self-medication.
Right.
That's the biggest thing.
And as a person who when I went to school with predominantly white students. And one of our classes talked about mindfulness and deep breathing and all those exercises, which I now love. But I admit to all my clients, especially my teenage clients or like clients of color, that I thought that was crap. I was like, I'm not deep breathing my stress away. That's not happening. Like I'm going to just take 4 breaths and all of a sudden I'm going to be fine, because that's not something that's taught to people. And it's also something that feels so fake because it's not like something you can hold or really why would breathing change how I'm feeling? And I think it took me like a full semester before I went into that. I was like, if I told my grandma right now, my grandma who grew up in the hood in Puerto Rico, who barely had food to eat, that I was depressed and the way that I was handling my depression or my anxiety was deep breathing, she would beat the crap out of me. She would tell me that I was wasting everybody's time and that was the stupidest thing, but it works. But if that's not stuff that you're teaching kids, now you can teach a child in preschool to belly breathe. There's a Sesame Street song for it, to deal with their stress through taking full breaths, and you can teach them the science behind it because it actually works, because your body has certain systems put in place for survival, and you can tell them all this and it makes more sense versus do some yoga or take stretch, all those kinds of things that it's just like, if I'm barely being able to get through my day without being traumatized by society and systemic racism and all this stuff, why would I waste my time deep breathing? But it works. And until you you need to start early, get kids early and explain all these things so that they can use them as the world gets harder, because it's going to. But I wish someone would have started, when I was in kindergarten, that I could deep breathe or learn all these things, so that when I was, 15, 16, 17, dealing with anxiety or depression or whatever, that I had some skills versus trying to figure it out as a teenager with no one to talk to, which is why I think starting young in education is so very important. And I honestly think this generation that we have is doing such a good job with it. I mean, of course we can do more things, but we have, 6-year-olds making slime to help regulate their emotions, or making these fidget toys, or deep breathing. My niece does yoga because she thinks it's funny to watch me do yoga mostly, but she does yoga, and she will make a fidget toy and she'll play with it, and she knows how to calm herself down if she's having a bad day. All those things that are really important as people get older. But it started off because, one, she had an aunt who was a therapist, but also because they were doing it in classrooms and she was seeing it on TVs, and she was seeing all these things of other kids doing these things that are so important. So I definitely think starting younger in that stuff would definitely help. But yeah, I don't know if I got there, but
no, it's good. It's good. So I mean, that kind of so what can we do as a community? So someone like me who might be watching this and think yeah, this is something that should be addressed. I'd like to help, or what could I do as an individual to make things easier? Especially if I'm a person of color that has experience with a mental illness and it's been a positive experience, as much as that can be a positive experience. How can I use my story or my voice, to encourage other people or let them know that it's okay?
I think it's just talking, word of mouth, talking to people about, I think we've been taught to keep mental health a secret, I'm going to see my therapist kind of thing, versus now I think the new generation is openly talking about, my therapist said this and that kind of stuff, and making it normal, having these conversations where you talk about ways that you've coped, so that people don't think it's weird or that they think that, every experience is a bad one. I think just having those conversations, even if you had a bad experience, having those conversations too, like maybe this isn't the therapist for people who look like me, all of that is helpful. I think just communication, because to be honest, everything that people of color have like gone through, why they move to certain communities, why they do certain things, word of mouth. We tell our people back, on the island, hey, Milwaukee's a good place. They have this, they have that. We move around based on word of mouth. We don't move around based on like what an article in a paper has told us. It's about how we talk to each other. So when it comes to mental health, talking, I think, is the most important thing, and being honest that, I struggled with this. Yes, I struggle most days. Some days I can't get out of bed. I can't brush my teeth. Making that a normal part of conversation, so that if someone else is experiencing it, they can talk about it and they can potentially find resources if you have them. I think communication is 100% the easiest way to get it more normalized and get people out there trying to get help.
Cool.
So piggybacking off of Carrie, conversation is definitely important. However, just to reach like a larger scale of people is like maybe put on events and then get more volunteers that's willing to help out in the community to kind of talk about these things. I know when I was a youth, when I would hear stories, I'd be like, oh, okay, other people are experiencing this. So hearing stories, like resource rallies, things like that, to kind of get people under, like knowing what's out there. Because a lot of times people don't know what's out there. They don't know where to go for the help. They don't know what to do. The kids might bring home the fidget spinner, but then it's like a toy, but what is this for? Or if they start playing with it, they're like, oh, okay, well, I get it. So the family don't know. So maybe having resource fairs within the community, as far as the school system, NAMI for that matter, or just being more available. I think being more available so they're out there to see what's out there. That makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so we'll ask again, did anybody have any questions?
I just want to add a little bit about PTSD, because that's like primarily what I focus on.
Sure.
I went to a training forever ago. I don't remember who the person is. So if the person ever watches this, I'm acknowledging this is not my story. This is someone else's story. But they shared a story about how they had an uncle who was drafted into a war, and he ended up dying. And the way that he died was because people on, in the US Army, he was a cook, and they would shoot at his feet to make him dance. And one day he didn't. He got shot, and that's how he died. So when they would tell people that they, were afraid of war, they were afraid of the military, people always thought, oh, because the enemy is going to kill, you think you're going to die in war. They thought about the enemy killing them, but it was really the army that killed them. So I'm saying this only because even if you haven't experienced trauma, those stories are traumatic. Those stories will carry on into people. And as a person of color, you can't exist in this society without some trauma. And I think it's important that people acknowledge that you don't only get PTSD because you're a veteran in a war. You get PTSD by experiencing a traumatic event. Mm-hmm. So there are people who are struggling with this on a daily basis and don't understand why, or don't understand what resources they have, or don't understand why they have to smoke weed every day, or they have to do this, or they have to do that to make it through the day. So I want to just say that because I feel like PTSD gets this, you get this idea that it's just for vets. It's
veterans,
just for people who've experienced war. But it's like, if you've been sexually assaulted, you're carrying around a physical reminder of your trauma every day. You're most likely going to develop PTSD. If you have heard countless stories of people being killed in a certain location, guess what? You're going to avoid that locations that look like that. You're going to be hypervigilant. You're going to have PTSD symptoms. You're going to have all these things. So I just want to say that so people are aware that it's more common than people think,
Yes. And I would wholeheartedly agree with that. We do tend to think of veterans and war when we think of PTSD, and it's so much more than that. So much more, childhood trauma that's carried for years and years and years and passed down through generations, it goes very deep.
Yeah, and other
people are getting better at it though. People are getting better with identifying PTSD, what different trauma they experience, even if it's criminal justice things that they experience. And then anxiety and depression, those are being talked about a lot more nowadays, I'm seeing. So they are getting a little better.
Yes.
I just feel like most of my sessions start off with a explanation of what PTSD actually is. Because people come in and be like, well, you know, I keep reliving the trauma. I keep jumping up out of my chair every time someone comes in. I keep doing this and I keep doing that, and I don't know what it is. And I'm just like, let's pull out the DSM and I'll tell you that you fit every criteria of PTSD.
Right.
You know, and we go through a whole education thing, and I explain how PTSD is developed, and it's just a malfunction of certain systems that we've have to keep us alive, but they just never think it's an option or it's a thing, because they're like, well, I never went to war, why would I have PTSD? And it's just so much more than that. You know, if you like experience one traumatic event, regardless of how small or little people think it is, you can develop PTSD. Or if you hear about a traumatic event, it's not even necessarily you had to be the one that went through it, you know? And so like when it comes to like the police, if I'm seeing people being shot on TV that look just like me over and over and over and over again, guess what? When a police officer comes behind me and I'm getting anxious and I'm starting to sweat and I'm starting to, even though I've never done anything wrong, I don't even like to jaywalk, but guess what? If a police officer's behind me, I'm stressed. I'm beyond stressed. I'm freaking out. I'm shaking. Even though, again, the most I've ever done was go 5 miles over the speed limit, but I've seen so many people be killed for less. Why wouldn't I think that I'm on that list?
Right.
So now I can't handle a conversation with a police officer without freaking out. But that's just because I've seen it. Like I've seen the trauma right there on TV multiple times, or on my phone, or everywhere. I've seen what happens. So yeah, I think as a person of color, most people are going to develop some sort of symptoms of PTSD. I don't think you can make it through this world without having that. Or as a woman, you know, I'm going to hold my keys between my fingers to keep myself safe. I have a taser, I have a knife, you know, I have all these things just so I can move through the world feeling better. And, you know, but if a man comes up behind me and it's 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to jump. I'm going to be looking at him. I'm going to try and get all my surroundings. I know which way to run, all those things. Those are all PTSD symptoms, even if you don't fit the diagnosis completely. But
Right. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I mean, nail on the head. Like, and again, I think those are things that people forget or overlook. I shouldn't say forget, or maybe overlook.
You know, another positive too is that Children's Hospital, they started going into the school system. I know timing can be an issue too with some parents, especially a parent who works full-time and a part-time and some more stuff. You know, that can be an issue too that we face. So Children's Hospital did a good job within Racine County going into the school system to provide the care and getting some of the parents on board. They're at the career fairs. And they offer a very good support system. So that's just an FYI.
yeah, that's another good point. Meeting people where they're at is important. If a mom can't take off work to bring her kids to therapy, then the kid's not going to get therapy. But if a therapist can go into the school during, you know, lunch hour and provide them that service, then that's the best thing possible, you know. We try to do that as much as possible. We go into the schools and we provide services within the schools, because we understand that if you have multiple children, that it's going to be difficult for you to get to us. Not only that, but we can service more people if we can get to you. And, you know, because you're not gonna be able, I have to wait till after school to see you, versus I can see you during your lunch period and I can see more people throughout my day.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I know here at NAMI, we're doing more with the school systems by getting in and doing education pieces on mental illness, the signs and symptoms. And we're even doing that now with elementary age students with mental health chat. So we definitely recognize the importance of getting in front of our young people and educating them, and letting them understand that it's not something that they need to be afraid of. All right, well, if there's not any other questions, I am going to thank you both for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you guys joining me and making this happen. This is all great information and it's really important. And the work you guys do, both of you, is great work and very important work for our community as well. So thank you for that too.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. This has been recorded, so we will post this on our website. If you know somebody who would be interested that didn't get to make it, please keep an eye out for that link and feel free to share it. All right, everybody have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.